Okay. If all of the judges are ready to begin. A few months ago, I saw a story where a Jordanian soldier had his fighter plane shot down over enemy territory. ISIS captured this man and tortured him relentlessly. They begged for information about his state. They brought him almost to the point of death. When he could give them no more information, they locked him in a cage and set him on fire, filming his brutal death. The way I found out about it was I happened to be watching the news at the time. Shepard Smith was reporting, and he said, "These images are brutal, they're not okay, but we're going to report about them. If you don't want to see this, if you think it might cause you problems, please turn off your TV for 3 minutes." That's about how long the segment's going to last. But it's important for you to know the brutality of ISIS. It's important for you to know that what they're doing is wrong. I respect what Shepard Smith did, and we think all journalists should hold this standard in their journalism ethics. That's why this House believes that the media should show the actions of the Islamic State in their full brutality. And that's the motion we are given today. This House can represent the members gathered here today. And we're going to define a few terms and give a few points of reference what we mean when we uphold this statement as the government team. When we talk about Islamic states, we're not bounding them to our traditional sense of what government means or what even land or boundaries mean. Islamic states can be where law or politics are dictated by the Islamic religion. We can look at examples of ISIS or Pakistan, Syria, or in past instances, the Taliban. Some more limits that we would just like to be made aware before this round continues is that we do not think that all Muslim countries are bad or that all Muslim countries hold the same ideal as these specific instances or as all Islamic states. That's just a boundary out there to get that out of the way. And we think that journalism ethics should still apply in upholding this motion. Journalism should never be to exploit or to be used for shock value. That should still stay intact. We're not encouraging the exploitation of individuals when we uphold this motion. What we're saying is that they should weigh the moral versus the legal ramifications of what they're doing. They should make sure they're telling the full truth and nothing but the truth. And when we talk about media, we're talking about frontline journalists. You can think of maybe the AP, Associated Press, that takes pictures of what's going on around the world, and then other sources, therefore, take their images and use them in their reporting. So moving on to our argumentations or our contentions of why we believe that the media should show the actions of Islamic states in their full brutality. The first point is education, the next is integrity, and then the final point will be about informed action. So talking about education, we think that people should be made aware of what's going on, like I said in my opening speech. When journalists are able to do this, they're able to show the full brutality of what is going on around the world. They're able to show the full actions and what these leaders and what these followers are doing in their day-to-day lives. People need to be made aware that what's going on is actually horrible. And when people are educated, information can then become accessible once people are being educated. That's the whole idea, is that this accessible information will be educational for them, as we'll see a little later on. Next is the second point of integrity. Journalists are supposed to be agents of truth. They're supposed to show you what's going on around the world and tell you, make sure you know the full situation of what's happening. In the current situation, there's the fear that you might not be getting the full truth when you turn on your nightly news. What you see on Twitter or the articles you read online might not be what's going on. There's the whole idea that people are being informed, are told not to say things by their governments, or being told not to say things for the protection of people's sensitivities. So there's this idea that people might not know the full story of what's going on. But when journalists hold this standard that they should show the full actions of what's happening around the world, they themselves inform integrity and let people know that we are telling you the full truth. And that's important for journalists because that holds their whole idea that they are agents of truth, that they are going to tell you what's happening around the world. Third and finally is the idea of informed action. Now, I'm pretty sure people are mostly aware, but as the United States specifically, we're involved in so many aspects of the world. We become involved in so many different arguments. We become involved in so many different types of wars that it's hard for people to stand behind their leaders. And it's hard for people to make a decision about social situations or make a decision about just actions that their government or their leaders take. But when journalists are aiming to be educational, when they're aiming to have integrity, people can therefore make informative actions. Citizens are able to know what's going on around the world and think for themselves and rationalize what's happening on a day-to-day basis around the globe. They're not kept in this little bubble of, oh, what's happening in my small town, or what's happening maybe in my state or in my country. They're able to figure out what's going on around the world and therefore become more in tune with what their political leaders are doing when they pass laws, when they go across borders and discuss things with other foreign leaders. This in turn can lead to either support or opposition of what their leaders are doing. Because right now there's this kind of limbo of we don't actually really have this connection of what our political leaders are doing. We don't know what our ambassadors are doing across the globe. We don't know what our president's opinion might even be. And it's hard for citizens to support that. You can see this in the instance of should we be staying in should our soldiers be staying in other territories, or should they be removed and brought back home? There's various ideas on what should actually happen with that, and people just are not very well informed, and the media is not doing a good enough job of telling them what's going on in these Islamic countries to make sure that people know what's happening. So this informed action leads to accountability of political leaders, because people can either say, yes, we know what you're doing, we know what's going on in these countries, and we know that this action needs to happen, or they can say, what's going on in these countries doesn't equal the need for that action, and our political leaders should not be making that decision. They should not be doing that. So it leads to a more democratic society, it leads to a more involvement of the citizens in their own state when journalists are honest, when journalists hold integrity, when they're educational. And this informative action leads to a better state and a better knowledge of the citizens. So at the end of the day, we think that this House believes that the media should show the actions of the Islamic State in their full brutality. This is essential for journalists, and it's essential for us to encourage. This is not a bill that we're passing. This is not a law that we're requiring takes place. What we're simply doing is encouraging that journalists do this. We are encouraging that they have this education, that they uphold integrity, and that their desire is for citizens to take informative action. Thank you.
I won't move it out of the way this time. Okay, ready? All right, so thanks to everyone coming out today. I hope we have a great debate. Today we're debating this notion that this House believes that the media should show the actions of the Islamic State in their full brutality. So I just want to start off by emphasizing that one really key word, their full brutality. My partner and I aren't getting up here and trying to say that they shouldn't show any brutality. We're just going to make an argument that they shouldn't show it in their full brutality. So I just want to clarify that before we get started. So she used the example of the Jordanian soldier. She said, the journalist mentioned that it was going to be very brutal, and that he advised users to turn off their televisions if they didn't think that it was going to be profitable for them to see, or if they had children in the room, etc. But she found it important to be able to see that so that she could understand the story. But our argument is based around the fact that did she really need to see that to be able to understand the story, to be able to understand the situation? Because on our side, on opposition, we believe that you can understand these situations without having to see every single explicit image. We kind of have this example from like the old days when things were not shown as much on television. So movies, say it's like a sex scene. They kind of just show the door closing and let you know, okay, we know what's going to happen, but we don't have to see the explicit details of what's going to happen. Why? Because it can be harmful to our children. It can be harmful to our children. It's something we don't necessarily want everyone to have the availability to see. And her example with the news, what if it was a mother that was cooking and she wasn't really paying attention to what happened, and they showed this story and she didn't turn the TV off and there were children in the room? We believe this could have negative effects on those children, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in our case today. I'll take your question.
So we want to be aware of the children looking at these images, but do we want the media to treat everybody like children?
No, exactly not. We can talk about that. Okay, so let's talk about that. Okay, No, of course we don't want the media to treat everyone like children, because guess what? If you're an adult, you can go seek out these images. You can go seek out ISIS beheadings on the internet, but it's not something that's easily accessible for a child. You have to know how to navigate the internet. You have to know what website to go to. You have to find the right links. And whether or not you believe that you should or should not do this, it is available to you as an adult. So if you want to be a more informed citizen, you have that option. And we absolutely think that that option should be protected. She said that we want to uphold journalistic ethics, and of course, we believe that we want to uphold journalistic ethics as well. And she said that these images will not be used for their shock value. But we just inherently disagree with that. What are they being used for if it's not for shock value? If it's not to just get a side riled up against another cause? I mean, we've seen what this has done, like with the Eric Gardner case here in New York. It really divided two sides, the explicit images, and it really didn't lead to that much profitable knowledge or education on either side. It just kind of created two sides that hated each other based on the explicit images that they saw. So we think that, again, we don't really see the value of this beyond the shock value, because they say that we want it to be educational. People need to know what's going on, know that it's actually horrible. And my opinion is that we already can know this. We already should know this, not at this time. For example, they already show the videos, of the man sitting there in the orange jumpsuit on his knees with the knife to his throat. They just don't show the knife cutting through his jugular. I think that the image of seeing the guy in the black garb holding the knife to his throat is enough. I don't think we need to take that next step, and neither does my partner. She said that another thing they want to talk about is integrity. If we don't have these explicit images, they fear that you might not be getting the whole truth. Well, we'd like to say that, I think these images could be used by the media to distort the truth. They can use this to get at your gut, to get at your heart, and to distort the truth of what's really going on. Journalism isn't just about plastering shocking videos and photos up there. It's about actually having a stance, reporting on what actually happened. And yes, of course, there's always a risk as fallen human beings that we could, that journalism could fall into a place where they're not telling the whole truth. They're not telling the complete truth. But at the end of the day, we ultimately have to trust them, because even if it's the videos that they're showing, that's still them showing us the videos. It's not like we're there to see it with our own eyes. It's going to be interpreted by the media regardless, and we believe that we should have some discretion in doing that, not at this time. Like I said, she believes that this will lead us to informed action. And I kind of already brought up the Eric Gardner case and how we don't believe that that's not necessarily true, because she said that, we don't know what our president and what our ambassadors are doing over there. We don't necessarily know what's going on. We can't keep them accountable. Well, this isn't videos of what our president and what our ambassadors are doing. This is videos of showing the Islamic State in their full brutality. So I just don't think that's a very valid argument. We still don't know it's not like we're talking about videos of like what Obama is over there negotiating or what our ambassador is negotiating. We're talking about Islamic State videos in their full brutality. So I don't think that that's necessarily a valid argument. And also, like I had already mentioned, we believe that you can already be plenty informed on your own. You have the news, you have the journalistic reports, and if you want to seek out those videos, you can do that on your own by going online and seeking out those videos. So now I'm going to talk about a couple points now that I'm done with my rebuttal that my partner and I are going to make, and he's going to expand on. So we have some reasons not to. So we have this idea of discretion. So I talked a little bit about that with the old movie example. If we allow this sort of content to be shown on the news, then what are we going to allow in movies? What are we going to allow in video games? It's just kind of pushing the envelope even further, one step further, to saying, hey, this is okay to show on public television. Well, if it's okay to show on public television, then what's okay to show in a movie theater or on a video game? And we believe that these things can be potentially harmful to, especially children and those that don't necessarily have the mental capacity to be able to responsibly and maturely view these images and make an informed decision after viewing them. And so, like I said, it comes down to the fact that there are children that can't process this correctly. We think this could lead to things like racism and hate. I remember as a child myself, seeing the images of the two towers burning and then falling down, and then seeing images of, Middle Eastern men plastered on the TV screen. It gave me a certain disposition towards them and towards their religion as a child that didn't know how to handle that. I wasn't educated. I didn't know that wasn't the majority stance in their religion. I was just a child. And so I view those very explicit images that are burned in all of our heads, and I make certain choices, or I make certain choices and actions towards those that I wouldn't necessarily make if I was an adult and informed. And again, like I mentioned, we just believe that overall it just desensitizes us to these images. If we're okay with showing this, then what are we going to be okay with showing in other areas of the media, in other areas of culture? Because like I said, what's the point? It's like the movie Shutting the Door. What's the point in showing the explicit sex scene? Is there a point in that? You could maybe argue artistic value. You could maybe argue other things. But is that really more valuable than harming, small children and their minds? I don't necessarily think so. And again, they said we need to show it in their full brutality so that we can educate them. But we're saying we already do show some brutality. We show him sitting on his knees with the knife at his throat. We just don't show him finishing it off. And we think that we are showing enough already, and that we don't need to show it in its full brutality to be fully educational and totally impactful. That's why we strongly oppose.
Alexis de Tocqueville wrote in Democracy in America all about the importance of newspapers, the importance of having private associations that are talking about the real hard issues. And we on Side Government believe that if we don't have media, if we don't have our news media, our frontline journalists talking about the hard issues and showing us the hard images, they are shielding us from reality. They are treating us like children and not allowing us to use our own reason to make informed decisions. I want to ask, and I'm going to spend most of my time. The question that I have to ask you is, how does this information about the brutality seen in Islamic states become available? How does that information become available? We've seen an underlying assumption in the opposition speech that there's going to be these images available somehow. He's assuming that there is still going to be some vestige of people who are able to show the full brutality of the actions of the Islamic State. So they're talking about this system where there are people in the media who are doing due diligence and who are taking up those hard issues and showing us the images that we don't like to see. So we think that when they talk about this and when they rely upon that small group of people telling those hard stories, they're actually supporting our side. They're agreeing with us by saying that the media should show the actions in full brutality. Okay, so let's go kind of point by point through what they had talked about. In the beginning, we have this example of the mother cooking. So she's sort of not really paying attention, and her child walks through the room, and she sees this graphic scene on the television. We think that that instance is actually parental negligence. There's still a role for the family, for the mother and the father, or whoever's, the small group of individuals, seeing what are their children consuming. I mean, in my family, my mom would always ask me, like, okay, well, what kind of sites do you like going to? There's a way for there to be a conversation, a dialogue between the children and the parents about what they're seeing. So we don't need to shield every single person from graphic images just because there's an off chance that this child might see it. The parent actually needs to have a role in knowing what their children are seeing, and the parent is more competent to make that decision than the mandate given on the opposition side. They also make the point about people being able to navigate the internet to find these rare and exclusive sources. I will point out, just as a clarification, children still know how to navigate the internet to find questionable content. And they responded to our point about shock value. We were talking a lot about videos and images and how people who are looking at these images are going to have an emotional reaction to how things happen. And I think this is a really good point. People do have emotional reactions to images, but it's not the job of the media to say, we need to tone it down for you so that you have the presumed action. What the opposition basically wants us to do is to say, we want to make sure that people don't overreact. We need to control future outcomes. Therefore, in view of that outcome that we need to have, let's make sure that we don't show too much. And we think the news media is actually morally responsible to be honest, to have standards of integrity, and to give us that full truth, and then leave it up to the people to be wise enough to counter their emotion with their reason, to still let that reason be in charge, to be the governor in their lives. And so we also talked about just entertainment in general, so video games, explicit sex scenes in movies. We think that this is sort of a tangential issue. We're not talking about prurient curiosity. We're not talking about people who just want to look at pornography. We're talking about actual brutality. This is actual news. It's not a fictionalized scene or a fantasy. Things are actually happening, and we need to know about them. I also want to point us back to the model that we presented my partner presented in her first speech. We talked about how there's still the limits of journalistic integrity. Journalists are not supposed to be having their presence telling the news used to exploit other people. They're not supposed to be using it for shock value. So these images of brutality, the question was, if not for shock value, then for what? And we say, we've already given you the answer. The answer is for education and for informed action. So let me just paint a picture for you. What kind of informed action are we talking about? Well, there's many different stations in society, many different people having different ways of consuming news media, different ways of acting upon it. Some people like to tune into the news and just to see something on a television so they can learn what to do. Other people's preferred form of learning about the news is Tumblr or Facebook. We have different people, and the way that they respond to that knowledge tends to be different. So somebody who is a very logical, syllogistic mind could say, I'm going to learn about the facts by researching what exactly happened and then think about what I'm going to do in response to it. Other people do need that graphic image to make them be aware that something is happening. They're not going to read a 1,000-word article on some sort of news media. They actually need to see the graphic image for them to realize, this is horrible, I didn't realize this happened, because I'm just going to continue scrolling past it on my Facebook feed. Okay, just as a kind of analogy for this, the artist Serrano painted this beautiful, this is really controversial of me to say, but a really beautiful image. It's like a floating cross in this eerie yellow background, this gold. It's a very interesting image as a Christian to view because you see this cross and painted in such a surreal, such an imaginative way. But he titled it, Piss Christ. And when the media happened upon this thing, they didn't want to show the image. They didn't want to have that picture tell its own story. They said, let's strip this creative thing down to just a propositional statement. Let's talk about the fact about how sacrilegious it is that it was formed out of the artist's own urine. And so the conversation became skewed because they were only talking in words. And we've been given more than just words to communicate what's going on. We have been given the gift of photography and the gift of film. We've been given images, and we say images tell 1,000 words, and we think that's true. If you're going to come to make a decision, an informed decision about what's going on in the world, you cannot reduce it simply to propositional statements. You have to allow the human imagination and the human emotion to also have a role to play. Yes, you need to counter that emotion and the emotional impact with reason, but we cannot be denied the use of our eyes to see what's going on. So just going back to my question about how are these images going to become available if we do not support the government motion? The motion upon the table is this House believes that the media should show the actions of the Islamic State in full brutality. But first, I'll take your point.
Would you agree that many times...
Can you go? Okay.
Wouldn't you agree that many times ISIS actually provides these videos for us? They post them online, they post them on websites to show us the brutality themselves?
That's a point, but the media still has that role. Our own American United States media can still post those things to help us make these decisions. And so we're not children should just be spoon-fed graphic images. We're saying that parents still have a role in protecting the lives of their children, but we need to be able to let the news media treat us like adults. Instead of shielding us from the hard truth, we have to be able to see what's going on and be able to change it. So informed action. This means that it's going to galvanize people who are not just politicians by nature to have an idea about what's going on. It's going to allow people who are typically more private-minded to actually have an idea about what's happening. And so we live in a culture today where a lot of people just like to ignore the ugly truths. It's not convenient. I'd rather just pursue my own career. I'd rather just talk to my own friends. But the graphic images make the hard truth unavoidable. Thank you.
Am I good? Okay, yeah. I'd like to start by briefly rebutting and then adding on to some of the points that Johnny brought up. So their main points were informed action, and seeing these things leads to accountability, and it's educating, our citizens. And a couple months ago, I looked up the ISIS beheading video. I was curious, and it was terrible. You saw 100 Christians being beheaded. It was a very graphic scene. But if I had to take a step back and ask myself, did the probative value of that video really outweigh the harmful potential that it could have? And my response was no. Seeing the knife, cut somebody's head off doesn't actually lead me to be more informed. I would actually respond saying our citizens are already informed. Now, there's a video going around of a white cop in North Carolina shooting down a black man. Now, we didn't actually see the end of the video. We heard the gunshots, but we got the gist. People are already outraged. Look at Eric Gardner. We didn't see the full video of, him being choked. How many protests did we see because of that video, though? So my response would be that people are already informed from what the news is already showing. Nothing further is actually going to lead to any probative information or leading people to be any more informed to act. Now, second, they brought up, it leads to accountability. We hold our leaders accountable for the things that we see. And my response is, does it really? If we were to see the full brutality of what was going on, would we say, oh, wow, Obama really should have done something about that? And my response would be, no, I don't think so. I think that we get the gist from what the media already shows. And that's something that Johnny sort of elaborated on to begin with. The media already shows some brutality. If he saw the 9/11, clip, would seeing somebody on fire falling out of the building really have made him, put the political leaders to more accountability because he saw more graphic images? And my response would be no, what we see already can hold our leaders accountable, and I believe that we're already informed. Now, they also brought up the point that Johnny added on is, how do we get these videos if the media isn't going to broadcast them, if nobody's being aware of the truth? And his response was, ISIS is posting these videos. We already have the videos. If parents really want to get the videos, they can. They can navigate the internet. And granted, yes, children can too, but it's much, much harder. And so, I am a Manny in New York City, right? So, yep, it's not easy, And I babysit a 5th grader. And right now, he's going to therapy because he saw a video of a school shooting that happened in Colorado last year. And he's going to therapy because he thinks going to 6th grade, someone's going to come to his school and shoot it up. Now, my response is, the video that he saw was already on the news. You already see enough and you already hear enough to really get the probative value of what they're trying to get across. Do you actually have to see kids getting shot to really take anything away from that? I would also like to respond saying, they said, it's really parental negligence. The kids seeing these videos, it's really a fault on the parents' job. But as they pointed out, kids already have access to media everywhere. You ride a taxi cab and you're seeing the news right in front of you. Some things are simply unavoidable and the parent won't always be there to respond, accordingly. So simply saying, yeah, it's parental negligence if they let their kids see it, I would respond, no, kids are around the media all the time. Kids see the news all the time, and sometimes it's just simply unavoidable. So they say that, journalists have a moral responsibility. And I don't really like the word moral because it's kind of implying that for them not to show this, it's actually immoral, which is pretty strong language because I think it's really weighing morality versus discretion. I wouldn't actually say it's immoral not to show this. It's the news, having discretion on what to show and what not to show. It's having tact, essentially. Yeah.
What is the function of the news media, especially frontline journalists?
I would say to keep the people informed about what's going on. Leading me to my next point. Are we not already informed? Now just ask yourself if seeing the extra 30 seconds of that clip really would have been like, wow, I can't believe this is actually happening. Would reading a pithy summary and not seeing what they're already showing not keep you informed? Would there be more protests for Eric Gardner had they showed him actually being choked out? Would there be more, violence and outrage of the North Carolina shooting had we actually seen him fall down? And my response is no, I don't think so. I think that we have enough, and I think that Americans are pretty smart and they can put 2 and 2 together. So there are 3 points. It's informed action. So I'd just like to go through them again. It's informed action. And I would say that we already have informed action. Nothing about seeing the extra 30 seconds of a beheading really leads to any probative information that you take away from it saying, wow, I'm really glad I know that. I'm glad I know what beheading looks like. You know, we already have R-rated movies to show us that. Second, and I would like to go through the points that Johnny brought up and then just briefly elaborate on too. He brought up, you know, racism and disposition, and I think this is a big one because a lot of times we see videos and we hear it, you know, a certain sort of bigotry towards the Islamic State because of what we see. And I don't think that's, you know, showing the extra 30 seconds is going to do anything but cause people to be more racist. I don't think it's going to actually lead to more informed action. No one's going to take anything away from that they already haven't seen. Second, he talked about desensitizing. So really, like, what's the point? If you had to ask, you know, a journalist, yes, thank you for showing that, what was the point? What did you not accomplish that you could have accomplished by showing less of that? And they would say, oh, you know, we have a responsibility to show people the truth. But you can already access the truth from what you see. Truth isn't necessarily seeing the entire thing, it's putting two and two together. And there's a certain amount of, you know, accountability to your audience in general. You know, they talked about accountability a lot. I think you have accountability to everybody, to parents who have to, you know, shield their kids, to kids themselves. And so the last point he hit on was we already show brutality, and I think that's the point. You know, if the media really wasn't telling us the whole story, that's one thing. If we really didn't know a lot of what was going on, that's one thing. But I really think we do. I think we have a pretty clear picture on what ISIS is up to. I think, you know, the video of a man in an orange jumpsuit with a knife to his throat is informing us enough. I don't think there's anything they're actually leaving out or hiding from us. So for, you know, outside government to get up here and say, oh, it's immoral or it's a lack of integrity for not showing us this, I would just simply say it's balancing integrity with discretion. So that's why, you know, Johnny and I as opposing counsel, we like to argue that what the media already shows is enough and that there's no probative value that could really be added by showing, you know, the extra clip of brutality to keep the people more informed. We just don't think that's actually practical, and we don't think it actually happens. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through a little bit more rebuttal building off of what Grant said, and then kind of just boil it back down to what this debate is really about for you guys before we finish our last speech on your side opposition. So, you know, Grant talked a little about rebuttal, but I want to bring some more points up. So she said, you know, the point of the media is so that we can be informed. You know, the newspaper, you know, what they're talking about, they're showing issues. You know, without these, we can't make informed decisions. But, you know, what we like to say is we already have this great media. We have newspapers. We have news outlets. They're keeping us informed. I mean, how sad is it if our American people won't take the time to read a 600-word op-ed, they have to see a crazy violent image? I mean, if that's really what it's going to take to get them going or get them to be informed, I think that's pretty sad about the American people, because ultimately it doesn't take that long to sit down and be informed. You should be able to, you can turn on the news and hear the journalists talk about a story and become informed, and they'll show you some images. They just won't show you the full extent of those images, and that's exactly what we're getting at, and I'll talk about that again later. She also brought up this point, which I questioned her on: how does this information become available if we can't show it? And like I said, ISIS a lot of times gives it to us. They're the ones posting it on the internet themselves. They want us to see this. Why do they want us to see this? Because they want our children to fear them. They want our people to fear them, okay? And what I'm saying is we have to have discretion so that our children aren't afraid of them, so they're not afraid to go to school, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. I'll take your question.
So you'd prefer ISIS to be the curator of the images we see?
I mean, ISIS is the curator of the images we see. It's not like, it's not, the guy holding the knife to his throat doesn't say, oh, hold on, journalist over there, can you get the shot on this? Is this okay? Okay, they're the ones shooting it in the first place. We can't have this information available to us. So I think it's a bit of an irrelevant question, because ISIS is the one curating this, and they want us to see it, and we don't want to show that. We don't want to give in to them. And so she said, you know, how should they show it? You know, She said, well, opposition said that it is available on the internet, so children could go on and see it. But our point was, it is available on the internet, but it's not readily available. This isn't CNN we're talking about. This isn't CBS. This isn't in the taxi cab television that's in front of you. It's not in the living room while your mom's cooking dinner. You have to go out and explicitly look for it. And of course, I'm sure there would be tragic stories of children getting on the internet and somehow finding this. And I think that's unfortunate. But again, we would agree that it is the parents' job to try and parent their children and make sure that they're looking at the right things. It's just the fact that at the end of the day, regardless of the parents' intentions, we think the children are going to see these images regardless of what their parents' intentions are, because they could be so readily available, and that's why we oppose. She said that that we're trying to just control outcomes. We want to control people's outcomes and what they think about things. That's not true at all. We're advocating great journalism. We're advocating great storytelling. And we think that that can be done without having to rely on these over-explicit images to do that job well. Yes, take your question.
Is the purpose of the media to tell a great story or to tell the truth?
To tell the truth, absolutely. And that's exactly our point. We think the truth is being told. I think that the side government is trying to paint this picture that we're not getting any truth. We're not getting any images. We're not getting what's really going on. When on side government, we like to say that we are. Okay? We're saying we already see the man in the jumpsuit on his knees with the knife to his throat. Do we need to see it slit through his neck? Okay? Is that really what we need to see to be informed? And really, how sad would that be if that's what it would require? That's what we'd like to say on side opposition. They also talk about integrity. They say, the media isn't supposed to use this for shock value. I think that's a pretty big assumption. They're not supposed to. That doesn't mean they won't. Okay? There's a big difference there. Just because they're not supposed to, it might not be good for their integrity, doesn't mean they're not going to use these images just to create shock value. That's a point that we definitely like to hammer home in opposition. And again, she mentioned this quote from de Tocqueville about the newspapers, about the media, its importance. And I'd just like to just make sure that we hammer that home, that we are affirming that. We think that they can do that job and do it very well without these explicit images. It doesn't take that much time to sit down and read an op-ed. You can still turn on the news and watch a couple-minute segment and become informed. It doesn't require seeing the rest of that video to be fully informed. And so that's what we'd like to make sure we point out here. A couple other points. She said, we want journalistic ethics to be upheld. I already kind of mentioned that about shock value. We would love to hope the best for our journalism, but that doesn't mean that they're always going to use these images properly. We think that they maybe should use these images in the right way, but that doesn't mean they're always going to, and that's the major risk that we have here. And we think, like Grant said, he's not saying we shouldn't show anything. He's just saying we should, balance our integrity with discretion. And I think that's really what it comes down to. And discretion is important. We see this in plenty of areas of life. This is why we rate movies. This is why parents don't let their children see certain things, et cetera. We've talked about that a bit. That is so important, and it's the problem with making this stuff readily available is that that's going to take it out of the parents' hands. It's going to take it, it's going to be shown to children who don't necessarily want to see it. And at the end of the day, it just comes down to the fact that we already think there's good journalism being done. We already think that Americans can become informed. I would hope that we all in this room are already informed. It's simply about, do we need to see that knife finish going through the neck? We don't think so on side opposition, and that's why we strongly oppose.
Should we be allowed to see brutality, or should we just kind of dream of a world of rainbows and sunshine where the media always tells us the truth and we always get the news right away and we don't even have to think about it, it's just given to us on a silver platter? Today, when I'm refuting and summing up the arguments in today's round of why you should side with the government, those are important facts to remember. First of all, the opposition talked about how much they believe that the citizens are informed already. You know everything there is to know about the world, and, well, that's good enough for them. The whole point of this is to expose the full brutality of what's going on. And while people might have issue with that, that's important to remember. In their first speech, they talked a lot about the emotions, of how people might be emotionally unstable when this happens. But that's the whole idea. An emotional response is sometimes what's necessary to get people fully behind their opposition to, say, an Islamic State. Sometimes that emotional response needs to happen. You can talk all you want about how bad abortion is, and maybe in a film you can show a woman being rolled into a hospital room, but what's really turned people against abortion and what has changed Planned Parenthood workers and employees' minds about the idea of abortion is actually seeing ultrasound abortions and seeing the actual brutality, seeing the full brutality of that death. Not just seeing a woman being wheeled into a room, seeing the actual death occur has changed people's minds. That's what's important, and that's why full brutality should be shown on the media today. Next, they said, oh, parents can still access them if they would like to be able to. The whole point of this is not about access, it's about the integrity of the journalist. People should be given even easier access to this. What it's important about, though, is to remember the integrity of the journalist, not necessarily the integrity of how people will misuse that. The opposition talked about how the child he nannies was really scared when he heard about the shooting that occurred at a school and was terrified to go into the 6th grade. Well, guess what? I was scared once, too. I never went through therapy, but I saw 9/11 happen. My dad was actually flying an airplane during the time of 9/11. My dad could have been the pilot crashing into the Twin Towers. That scarred me as a child. I was terrified. It was only recently when I was able to get on a plane and feel at peace. These graphic images are terrifying, and while it might be hard for our children to see them, instead of my parents shying me away from them and telling me to turn my eyes, they use that as a tool to teach me that there are bad people out there. Not all Muslims are necessarily bad, but these particular men had ill intent, and that's not okay, and we should be morally against that. So while it's sad that some children might be scarred from it, and while I personally was scarred from it, I think I'm a better person today and a more logical person today because I was able to see those images, and because my parents used their parental responsibility to teach me and to tell me the right way to think about the situation. Moving on, talking about how not showing is immoral, and not showing does not equal immoral actions of journalists. The problem behind this is that it could potentially lead to immoral actions, that we don't necessarily know everything that's going on, so we don't even know if the journalists are telling us the full truth, and that's why it's a potential problem, because we don't know exactly what's going on. Yes?
Will them showing the images guarantee that they'll be telling the full truth?
No, but as we stated earlier, we do not encourage encourage them to not tell the full truth. We stated at the beginning that we cannot use it to exploit people. We shouldn't use it for shock value. They should be using it to tell the truth. So if they are using it in that instance, we are against that as well. Next, they talked about how people are, again, already informed enough. They have a lot of faith in their journalists and in the news source that they are getting information from. I was actually recently watching a documentary about the Amanda Knox case. I would be terrified if I trusted the journalist in that case, because what they did is took this one story and ran with it. They talked about how she was a she-devil and basically was out to get people without even looking at the facts, because that's what the prosecution was telling them. People weren't encouraged to perform correct journalism acts. They weren't told the full story. They weren't shown the full truth. So I would be very wary of fully trusting a news source in that instance. But if we are to encourage them to show the full brutality, encourage them to show the full truth, we can have a better faith in our journalists, and we can be able to tell for ourselves whether or not we should take action against what's going on. They talked about how ISIS is giving these videos, and yeah, you can access them. Just go online. It's kind of, just go online and you'll find them. This is not okay, and this should be rejected. And this is why it's so important for the media to be able to show these videos, to be encouraged to show this full brutality. Because once you log onto ISIS's website, guess what? The government's watching you. Big Brother always knows what's going on. He's going to see you log into that ISIS website, flag you as a terrorist, and you could be potentially investigated for trying to be informed of the truth. Instead of the journalists doing their job and telling you what's going on in the world, you could be flagged as a terrorist because you simply want to be informed. This is not okay, and this is negligence on the part of a journalist, not at this time. Talking about integrity, and we said that we do not encourage the misuse. And he stated that discretion is important. The whole reason this is going on is because journalists are using their discretion. They're trying to be sensitive of their viewers. My partner and I believe that this discretion lies in the hands of the viewers. It's not up to the journalists to show discretion. It's up to you to decide, oh, I just don't want to see that. That's not healthy for me. The journalist's job is to tell you the truth and nothing but the truth. And that's why it's important for them to show this. They shouldn't be concerned about, oh, maybe, maybe like right-wing conservatives wouldn't like to hear this information, so we're just not going to share it. Their goal is to tell you exactly what's going on in the world. And by them not doing that, they are negligent. And that action should be discouraged. So again, responsibility lies in the individual. To sum up these arguments, we can look back at the original points that I brought up. Some voting issues or reasons that we should side with the motion today. First of all is that of education. People should be informed of what's going on. They need to be aware of what's happening in order to be educated, in order to support their leaders, and in order to basically have a well-rounded knowledge of what's going on around the world. Second, that of integrity. And journalists should be held to a standard of they will tell the truth. They shouldn't be concerned of what might offend some people. They shouldn't be concerned over what might hurt people's feelings or what negative emotions might be caused. They need to tell people what's going on, and it's not their job to show discretion. It's the individual's job to show discretion, to decide, I don't want my child to see that, or to decide, I'm going to use this as an educational experience to show my child what's evil in the world, and to show them what's wrong, and to show them what I should discourage. And that discretion lies with the viewer, not with the journalist company, not with the government, not with anyone showing you what's going on around the world. That is up to you. Third and finally is, again, that of informed action. Once we know what's going on around the world, we can make clear decisions. We can decide whether or not to side with our rulers. We can decide whether or not something is good, something is bad. We need to be informed. We need to be aware. We need to support the resolution that the brutality of that the actions of the Islamic State should be shown in its full brutality. Thank you.
Good job.